Dr. Jake Miller never thought his boring job would change everything. He worked alone at a small research station on the edge of known space, studying rocks and taking notes that nobody back on Earth seemed to care about. Day after day, it was the same routine. Wake up, check the computers, scan for anything unusual, write reports, and go to sleep. For 3 years, nothing exciting had ever happened. But Tuesday morning was different. Jake was drinking his coffee and looking at the morning scan results when something caught his eye. The energy readings were all wrong. Instead of the usual flat lines and predictable patterns, there were spikes and waves that made no sense. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. The patterns were still there, growing stronger. At first, he thought his equipment was broken. These old research stations weren't exactly known for their reliability. He ran diagnostic tests on every machine, checked all the cables, and even kicked a few computers the way his grandfather had taught him to fix stubborn machines. But everything was working perfectly. The energy was real, and it was getting closer. Jake spent the next 4 hours trying to figure out what he was looking at. He called up every database he had access to, compared the readings to every natural phenomenon he could think of, and even wondered if maybe someone was testing a new type of engine nearby. But deep down, he knew this wasn't anything humans had made. By afternoon, the readings were so strong they were overloading his sensors. Jake stepped outside his small station to look up at the sky. Space looked normal at first, just the usual stars and the distant glow of the nearby star system. Then he saw it. Something was there, something big. It started as just a shimmer, like heat waves rising from hot pavement in summer. But then it became more solid, more real. A massive shape began to appear, as if someone was slowly turning up the brightness on an invisible object. Jake's mouth fell open as he watched a ship materialize above him. It wasn't like the sleek metal ships humans built. This one looked like it was made of crystal and light, stretching across the sky like a floating city. Beautiful patterns of blue and silver light pulsed along its surface, and it was completely silent. No engine noise, no radio chatter, nothing. Just this incredible, impossible presence hanging in space above his tiny research station. Jake stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, just staring up at the ship. His scientist brain was screaming at him to take measurements, record everything, call for help. But another part of him, a deeper part, was telling him that his life had just changed forever. Then something touched his mind. It wasn't like hearing a voice or seeing something. It was more like suddenly remembering something important that he had forgotten. Images and feelings began flowing through his thoughts, gentle but persistent. He saw glimpses of a world unlike anything he had ever imagined, filled with beings of incredible beauty and grace. He felt their sadness, deep and overwhelming, like the grief of losing everyone you had ever loved. And then he understood. They were dying, the beings on the ship. These aliens that humans had always wondered about but never met were facing the end of their entire species, not from war or disease, but from something much more subtle and tragic. They simply couldn't have children anymore. Their population was growing older and smaller with each passing year, and they had tried everything they could think of to solve the problem. But they had been watching humanity, studying them from afar, learning about human biology and genetics. And in Jake, somehow, they had found something they had been looking for, something that could help save their entire civilization. The voice in his mind was feminine, ancient, and filled with both hope and desperate need. It belonged to their queen, a being of immense power who could speak across the vast distances of space using only her thoughts. Through their connection, Jake learned that her people were called the Velthara, and they had ruled among the stars for thousands of years before humans had even discovered fire. But now they needed help. They needed him. Jake felt the weight of her words as she explained what she had discovered about his genetics. Somehow, through a combination of factors he didn't fully understand, his DNA contained elements that could unlock the key to their survival. It wasn't something he had earned or chosen. It was just a random twist of biology that made him special in a way he had never imagined. The Queen's mental voice was both respectful and urgent as she made her request. She wasn't demanding anything from him, not yet, but she was asking him to consider something that would change not just his life, but potentially the future of two entire species. As the massive ship continued to hover silently above his research station, Jake realized that his quiet, predictable life was over. Whatever happened next, whether he agreed to help these aliens or refused their request, everything would be different from now on. The Queen's final message before breaking their mental connection was both a promise and a warning. She would be in touch with Earth's leaders soon, and they would discuss what came next. But she wanted Jake to know that she saw him not as a tool to be used, but as a person whose choice would be respected. Still, as Jake watched the alien ship fade back into invisibility, he couldn't shake the feeling that he might not have as much choice in the matter as the Queen had suggested. After all, when the survival of an entire civilization was at stake, how much did the wishes of one human really matter? He walked back into his research station on shaky legs and sat down at his communication console. He had to contact Earth and report what had just happened. But how do you tell people that aliens are real, that they need help, and that somehow you're the key to their survival? Jake stared at the blank message screen for a long time before he started typing. He knew that once he sent this report, there would be no going back. His simple life as a forgotten researcher on the edge of space was over, and something much bigger and scarier was about to begin. Jake's report to Earth caused chaos like nothing humanity had ever seen before. Within hours of sending his message, every major government on the planet was holding emergency meetings. Scientists were arguing, politicians were panicking, and military leaders were wondering if humanity was about to face its first alien invasion. But Jake wasn't thinking about any of that. He was sitting in his small research station, staring at the walls and trying to process what had happened to him. The alien Queen's voice still echoed in his mind, gentle but impossible to ignore. She had been polite, even respectful, but Jake wasn't stupid. He understood what was really being asked of him. His sister Lisa was the first person from Earth to contact him directly. She worked for the military's communication division, and her face on the video screen looked worried and angry at the same time. "Jake, what the hell is going on out there?" she demanded. "Every news channel on Earth is talking about aliens, and your name is being mentioned in classified briefings that I'm not even supposed to know about." Jake tried to explain what had happened, but it sounded crazy even to him. How do you tell someone that aliens had basically called dibs on you for saving their entire species? Lisa listened, her expression growing more concerned with each word. "You can't seriously be considering this," she said when he finished. "These aliens show up out of nowhere, claim they need you for some kind of breeding program, and you're just going to go along with it? What if they're lying? What if this is some kind of trick?" Before Jake could answer, Dr. Rachel Kim, his old mentor from university, joined the video call. Her gray hair was messier than usual, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Jake, I've been analyzing the data you sent," she said, her voice shaking with excitement. "The technology these aliens demonstrated, the energy readings from their ship, the fact that they can communicate telepathically across space. If even half of what they're offering is real, this could advance human science by centuries. At what cost?" Lisa shot back. "They want to take my brother and use him like some kind of resource. That's not cooperation, that's exploitation." The argument between his sister and his mentor continued, but Jake found his attention drifting. The alien Queen was trying to contact him again. He could feel her presence at the edge of his thoughts, patient but persistent. Unlike the first time, he didn't resist the connection. Images flooded his mind. He saw the Velthara homeworld, a place of impossible beauty with cities that floated among the clouds and forests that glowed with their own inner light. He witnessed their history, thousands of years of peace and prosperity, of art and science that made human achievements look primitive by comparison. But then he saw their decline. Generation after generation, fewer children were born. Families that had once been large and happy grew smaller and quieter. The Queen showed him empty schools, abandoned playgrounds, entire districts of their cities that had been sealed off, because there weren't enough people left to maintain them. The worst part was seeing the Velthara themselves. They weren't monsters or conquerors. They were people, just like humans in many ways, who loved their families and feared for their future. The queen herself was ancient by human standards, but she carried the weight of her entire species on her shoulders through their mental link. Jake felt her exhaustion and desperation. "I understand your fear," her voice whispered in his mind. "But please understand ours as well. We are not asking this lightly. We have debated for decades whether to contact your species. Many of my people believe we should simply take what we need and leave your world untouched. But I have studied humanity, and I see something in your species that gives me hope. You care for others, even strangers. You sacrifice for those you love. This is why I ask instead of demand." The mental connection faded, leaving Jake feeling drained but oddly peaceful. When he focused on the video screen again, Lisa and Dr. Kim were still arguing, but their voices seemed distant and unimportant. 3 days later, everything changed again. Earth's leaders had finally organized a formal meeting with the alien queen. Jake watched from his research station as the most powerful people on his planet sat around a conference table, staring at a shimmering projection of the Velthara queen that seemed to be made of light and crystal. She was even more beautiful than Jake had imagined from their mental connection, tall and graceful, with skin that seemed to shift between different shades of blue and silver. She radiated a kind of quiet authority that made everyone in the room sit up straighter. "People of Earth," she began, her voice somehow speaking everyone's native language perfectly. "I am Queen Zera of the Velthara. I come to you not as a conqueror, but as a mother whose children faced extinction. The negotiations that followed were unlike anything in human history." The queen explained that her people possessed medical technology that could eliminate most human diseases, energy sources that could power entire planets cleanly and safely, and scientific knowledge that could help humanity spread among the stars safely. All of this she offered freely, in exchange for Jake's cooperation in their genetic research program. But the more Jake listened to the formal discussions, the more he realized that this wasn't really about him having a choice. The queen was being diplomatic, respectful even, but the message was clear. The Velthara had the technology to take him by force if they wanted to. They were choosing to ask nicely. The politicians talked about sovereignty and human rights. The scientists drooled over the promised technology. The military leaders quietly discussed whether humanity could fight an alien race if negotiations broke down. But Jake was thinking about something else entirely. He was thinking about the empty schools he had seen in the Queen's memories. He was thinking about an entire civilization of people who were slowly disappearing, not because of war or disaster, but because biology had played a cruel trick on them. Could he really say no? Could he live with himself knowing that his refusal might mean the end of an entire species? On the other hand, could he trust aliens he had just met with his life and future? The Queen's final statement to Earth's leaders made Jake's decision both easier and harder. "I will not lie to you," she said, her image flickering slightly as if the communication was difficult to maintain. "Our situation is desperate, but I promise you this: Jake will be treated with respect and honor. He will be our guest, not our prisoner, and if at any time he wishes to return to Earth, we will not stop him. We ask for his help, not his life." That night, alone in his research station, Jake made his choice. Not because politicians told him to, not because scientists begged him to think of the greater good, but because he had looked into the mind of a dying civilization and found people worth saving. He sent a message to Earth's leaders and to the alien queen. He would go to the Velthara homeworld, but as Earth's first ambassador to an alien species, not as a resource to be used. He would help if he could, but on terms that respected both his humanity and their needs. As he packed his few belongings, Jake wondered if he was making the biggest mistake of his life or the most important decision in human history. He supposed he would find out soon enough. The journey to the Velthara homeworld took 3 days. but it felt like stepping into a dream. Jake had never imagined that space travel could be so smooth and quiet. The alien ship moved without any vibration or noise, and the walls seemed to glow with their own soft light. It was beautiful, but also strange in a way that made him feel very far from home. When they finally arrived at Velthara Prime, Jake pressed his face against the crystal window and gasped. The planet looked like something from a fairy tale. Instead of cities built on the ground like Earth, the Velthara had built their homes in the sky. Massive structures made of what looked like living crystal floated among the clouds, connected by bridges of pure light. Below them, forests of trees that sparkled like gems stretched as far as the eye could see. "Welcome to our world, Queen," Zara said, appearing beside him in the observation room, up close. She was even more impressive than her holographic image had been. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, and her skin seemed to shift colors like an oil slick, moving from deep blue to silver to purple as her emotions changed. Her eyes were large and kind, but Jake could see the weight of centuries in them. "It's incredible," Jake said honestly. "I've never seen anything so beautiful." The Queen's skin brightened slightly, and Jake realized that was probably equivalent to a smile. "We are proud of our world. Come, let me show you where you will be staying." Jake's new home was like nothing he had ever experienced. His rooms were carved from a single massive crystal that gave off a warm, welcoming glow. The furniture seemed to grow right out of the walls and floors, perfectly shaped for human proportions. Windows offered views of the floating city and the glowing forest below, and the whole place felt more like a palace suite than a prison cell. "This is amazing," Jake told Kale, the young Velthara guard who had been assigned to show him round. Kale was different from the Queen and the other older Velthara Jake had met. His skin shifted colors more quickly, and he seemed less formal, more curious about everything. "You really think so?" Kale asked, his skin flickering with what Jake was learning meant excitement. "I have always wondered what humans think of our architecture. Most of us have never seen a human before." Over the next few days, Jake learned more about Velthara society than he had ever expected to. They lived much longer than humans, sometimes for thousands of years, which meant that change came very slowly to their culture. They were organized into different groups based on their genetics, with the Queen's family being the rarest and most powerful. But the more Jake learned, the more questions he had. Why had such an advanced civilization allowed itself to get into this situation? How had they not seen the genetic problems coming? And most importantly, what exactly did they need? From him, Dr. Vel, the Velthara's chief scientist, was a serious, elderly being whose skin rarely changed from a steady silver color. When he explained the genetic program to Jake, his words were precise but not very comforting. "Your genetic structure contains certain elements that we have never seen before," Dr. Vel said, consulting a floating display that showed Jake's DNA in three-dimensional detail. "We cannot simply use your genetic material directly, as our species are too different. Instead, we need to create a catalyst, a kind of key that can unlock the fertility genes that have become dormant in our population." Jake stared at the complex diagrams floating in the air around them. "In creating this catalyst, what does that involve for me?" "Various procedures," Dr. Vel replied vaguely. "Nothing harmful, of course, but the process will take time, possibly months or even years to perfect." That night, Jake lay in his beautiful crystal bed and tried to process what he was really getting himself into. The Velthara were being kind to him, certainly. They brought him delicious foods that had been specially prepared to be safe for human consumption. They had given him access to their incredible libraries of knowledge. They treated him with respect and answered his questions patiently. But he was also starting to realize that he couldn't just walk out the front door if he changed his mind. It was Kale who helped him understand the truth. During one of their conversations in the Crystal Gardens, the young guard was showing Jake some of the bioluminescent plants. When Jake asked directly about leaving, "What if I decided tomorrow that I wanted to go home? Could I just ask for a ship back to Earth?" Kel's skin shifted to a darker blue, and he was quiet for a long time. "That would be difficult," he finally said. You are very important to our people now. There are those who believe that letting you leave would be the same as condemning our entire species to extinction. But Queen Zera promised I could go home if I wanted to. The Queen is wise and honorable, Kale said carefully, but she is not the only voice in our government. There are others who think differently about your situation. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. What do you mean? Kale looked around nervously, as if he was worried someone might be listening. There's a group led by High Counselor Vex. They believe that when the survival of our people is at stake, the wishes of one individual, even an honored guest, should not matter. They think the Queen is being too soft with you. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Kel's words and about the way some of the other Velthara looked at him when they thought he wasn't paying attention, not with the respect and gratitude he had expected, but with a kind of hunger that made him uncomfortable. The next morning, Queen Zera visited him personally, something she had never done before. She seemed troubled, her skin shifting through darker colors than usual. Jake, I want you to know that your safety and comfort are my highest priority, she said. But there was something in her voice that suggested she was trying to convince herself as much as him. There are some in my government who grow impatient with the slow progress of the research. But I have made promises to you and to your people that I intend to keep. What kind of impatience? Jake asked. The Queen was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. There are those who believe we should have simply taken what we needed without asking permission. They think I am being foolish to treat you as an equal when your species is so much younger and less advanced than ours. Jake felt his stomach drop. And what do you think? I think, Queen Zera said, her skin brightening to a more hopeful blue, that a civilization that survives by stealing from others is not worth saving. But I also think that my people are desperate and afraid. And desperate people sometimes make terrible decisions. As she left, Jake realized that his situation was more complicated than he had understood. He wasn't just trying to help save an alien species. He was caught in the middle of a political struggle that could determine not just his own fate, but possibly the future relationship between humans and Velthara. That evening, as he sat in his crystal room watching the alien sunset paint the sky in colors that had no names in any human language, Jake wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. The golden cage he found himself in was beautiful, but it was still a cage, and he was beginning to suspect that some of his captors had no intention of ever letting him leave. The question was, what was he going to do about it? Jake's growing suspicions about the Velthara finally led him to do something risky. Late one night, while his guards thought he was sleeping, he snuck out of his crystal room and began exploring parts of the floating city he wasn't supposed to see. Kale found him wandering through an abandoned section of the Royal Archives, surrounded by floating displays showing ancient Velthara history. The young guard's skin flashed bright orange with alarm when he spotted Jake. You cannot be here, Kale whispered urgently, looking around as if he expected security forces to appear at any moment. These records are forbidden to outsiders. Why? Jake asked, gesturing at the historical displays around them. What don't you want me to see? Kale hesitated, his skin shifting through nervous purples and blues. Finally, he made a decision that would change everything. You want to know the truth? Then look at this. He activated a new display, and Jake found himself staring at records that made his blood run cold. The documents showed 3 other species that the Velthara had contacted. Over the past 1,000 years, each time, the story had started the same way. The aliens had approached a younger civilization, claimed they needed genetic assistance for their survival, and offered advanced technology in return. But the partnerships hadn't stayed partnerships for long. The Kaelari were the first, Kale explained, his voice heavy with shame. They were peaceful people. Much like humans, the initial agreement was supposed to be temporary, just until our scientists could synthesize what they needed. But the research kept getting more complex, requiring more samples, more time. Eventually, the Kaelari weren't partners anymore. They were livestock. Jake felt sick as he read through the records. The Kaelari had been reduced to breeding populations, kept uncomfortable, facilities, but never allowed to leave or make decisions about their own lives. Their children were studied, their genetic material harvested, their culture slowly erased until they became nothing more than biological resources. What happened to them? Jake asked, though he dreaded the answer. They're gone, Kel said quietly. Not extinct, exactly, but not really alive either. They exist in our research facilities, but they're not people anymore, just specimens. The records showed to other species that had suffered similar fates. Each time, the Velthara had started with good intentions, but desperation had gradually eroded their moral boundaries until exploitation became the norm. Why are you showing me this? Jake demanded. Kel's skin flashed with determination. Because I'm part of a group that believes our people have lost their way. We've become so focused on survival that we've forgotten what makes survival worthwhile. My generation has grown up hearing stories about the old days, when the Velthara were known throughout the galaxy as peaceful explorers and scholars. Now we're known as the species that enslaves others to save itself. Before Jake could respond, alarms began ringing throughout the Crystal City. Emergency lights bathed everything in pulsing red, and Kale grabbed Jake's arm. We have to get you back to your rooms now. But they were delayed. As they rushed through the corridors, security forces surrounded them. At the head of the group stood High Counselor Vex, a massive Velthara whose skin was permanently locked in dark. Angry reds and blacks. Well, Vex said, his voice like grinding stones. Our honored guest has been exploring where he doesn't belong, and young Kale has been sharing secrets he shouldn't know. I was just curious about your history, Jake said, trying to sound innocent. Vex's laugh was cold and bitter. Curious enough to discover what bleeding heart fools like our queen don't want you to know. We are a dying species, human. We don't have the luxury of moral hand-wringing about the feelings of inferior civilizations. Those other species weren't inferior. Jake shot back, anger overriding his fear. They were people, just like humans are people. You turned them into slaves. We turned them into resources for the greater good, Vex corrected. Just as we will do with your species if our current approach fails. The Queen's diplomatic games have wasted precious time. Every day we delay is another day closer to extinction. That's when Jake realized what was really happening. The alarms, the security forces. The timing of this confrontation. This wasn't random. You're staging a coup, he said. Vex's skin rippled with satisfaction. The Queen has proven herself unfit to lead during a crisis. The Council has voted to remove her from power and placed our species' survival in more capable hands. Your cooperation will no longer be requested, human. It will be required. The next few hours were chaos. Jake was locked in a heavily guarded crystal cell while Vex's forces moved throughout the city, arresting anyone loyal to Queen Zera. But what Vex hadn't counted on was the Queen's telepathic abyss. It is even imprisoned in the deepest levels of the Royal Citadel. Queen Zera was able to reach out with her mind to coordinate resistance. Jake felt her presence in his thoughts, weak but determined. I am sorry, Jake. Her mental voice whispered. I tried to protect you from the darker aspects of my people's nature, but I have failed. Vex will use you until there is nothing left, just as we have done to the others. There has to be something we can do. Jake thought back, perhaps. Kale and others like him represent hope for our future. They believe there is a better way. But first, we must survive Vex's revolution, the battle for control of the Velthara. Government wasn't fought with weapons, but with minds. Queen Zera used her telepathic abilities to coordinate the rebels, while Vex relied on his control of the military and security forces. Jake found himself at the center of it all, a prize that both sides desperately needed. During the fighting, Kale managed to free Jake from his cell. Together, they fought their way through the crystal corridors, trying to reach the communication center so Jake could warn Earth about what was happening. Your people need to know the truth, Kale gasped as they ran. If Vex wins here, he'll come for Earth next. He won't make the same mistake of asking for permission. They reached the communication room just as Queen Zera's forces launched their final counterattack. The Queen herself appeared. her skin blazing with power as she used her telepathic abilities to turn Vex's own guards against him, but the effort was clearly draining her. "Send your message, quickly," she told Jake, her voice weak but urgent. Jake's fingers flew over the communication controls, sending an encrypted message to Earth that contained everything he had learned about the Veilthura's history and Vex's plans. As he finished transmitting, Vex himself burst into the room, his skin black with rage. "You've doomed us all, human," Vex snarled. "Without your cooperation, my people will die. And it will be your fault. Your people are dying because of choices they made centuries ago," Jake replied, standing between Vex and the weakened queen. "Enslaving other species didn't save you then, and it won't save you now." The confrontation might have ended in violence, but Queen Zera summoned the last of her strength for one final telepathic blast that sent Vex and his remaining supporters fleeing. The coup was over, but at a terrible cost. As medical attendants rushed to help the exhausted queen, she looked up at Jake with gratitude and something that might have been respect. "You have given my people something we had forgotten we needed," she whispered. "A chance to remember who we used to be." Jake knelt beside her, realizing that everything was about to change again. The political crisis was over, but the real challenge was just beginning. How do you save a species that has forgotten how to save itself? The days following Vex's failed coup were unlike anything Jake had experienced. The entire Veilthara civilization seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Queen Zera was recovering from her telepathic battle, but even weakened, she was working harder than ever to reshape her people's future. Jake found himself in an impossible position. Earth's government had received his warning message and was demanding his immediate return. Terrified that humanity might face the same fate as the other species the Veilthara had exploited. But leaving now would doom the Veilthara to extinction. And Jake had seen enough of their world to know that not all of them deserved that fate. "You're really thinking about staying, aren't you?" his sister Lisa said during their daily video call. Her face on the crystal screen looked worried and angry. "Jake, these aliens have a history of turning other species into slaves. How can you trust them?" "Because some of them are trying to change," Jake replied, thinking about Kale and the other young Veilthara who had risked their lives to expose the truth. "Lisa, I've seen what happens when fear makes people do terrible things. But I've also seen what happens when they choose to be better." Dr. Kim, who had been monitoring the situation from Earth, joined the conversation with news that changed everything. "Jake, our scientists have been analyzing the genetic data the Veilthara shared with us. We think we've found a different solution, one that doesn't require you to stay there permanently." Jake leaned forward, hopeful but cautious. "What kind of solution?" "The Veilthara's fertility problem isn't just genetic," Dr. Kim explained, her excitement obvious even through the transmission delay. "It's also social and environmental. Centuries of strict social classes and genetic manipulation have created the crisis they're facing. But if they're willing to make real changes to their society, we might be able to help them in a way that doesn't compromise anyone's freedom." That conversation led to the most important meeting in the history of both species. Queen Zera, still pale from her recent ordeal, met with Jake and a team of human scientists via quantum communication link. What they proposed was revolutionary. Instead of taking genetic material from humans, Dr. Kim explained to the assembled Veilthara Council, "We suggest a complete restructuring of your reproductive and social systems. The genetic diversity you need already exists within your population, but it's been suppressed by centuries of artificial barriers." Kale, who had been promoted to the Queen's personal counsel after his role in stopping the coup, translated this for the older Veilthara who were struggling to understand. "They're saying we need to break down the caste system completely, allow free reproduction between all genetic groups, stop trying to maintain pure bloodlines." The reaction from the traditional Veilthara was immediate and loud. Many were outraged at the suggestion that their ancient social structure was the root of their problems. But Queen Zera listened carefully, her skin shifting through thoughtful blues and greens. "This would mean changing everything about how our society works she said finally. Are you certain this approach would be successful? Jake stepped forward. Nothing is certain, Your Majesty, but I've learned something during my time here. Sometimes the thing that saves you isn't getting what you want, but letting go of what's been holding you back. The debates that followed lasted for weeks. Traditional Velthara argued that destroying their social order would be worse than extinction. Progressive voices like Kale countered that a society built on exploitation wasn't worth preserving anyway. Queen Zera found herself caught in the middle, trying to guide her people toward a future that many of them feared. But slowly, change began to happen. The Queen issued decrees dismantling the caste restrictions that had kept different genetic groups separated for millennia. She opened the royal archives to everyone, allowing ordinary Velthara to learn their true history, including the shameful treatment of other species. The most difficult moment came when Jake had to make his own choice about the future. Dr. Vel, the chief scientist, had developed a procedure that could indeed help restore Velthara fertility, but it would require Jake to undergo genetic modifications that would link him permanently to their species. You would become something new, Dr. Vel explained, his silver skin reflecting his serious mood. Not fully human, not fully Velthara, but a bridge between our peoples. You would live much longer than normal humans, and you would share a mental connection with our queen that could never be broken. But you could never return to the life you had before. Jake sat in his crystal room for 3 days, thinking about the choice. He could return to Earth as a hero, the human who had helped save an alien species and prevented a potential war. Or he could stay and become something unprecedented, a living symbol of cooperation between two civilizations. On the third night, Queen Zera visited him one last time as a purely human being. I cannot ask this of you, she said, her skin pale with exhaustion and emotion. What we're proposing is too great a sacrifice. You have already given us so much by showing us a better path. Jake looked out his window at the glowing forests below, and the crystal cities floating in the clouds. What if it's not a sacrifice? What if it's the next step in evolution for both our species? The procedure took place in the Royal Medical Center, witnessed by representatives from both Earth and the Velthara government. As the genetic modifications took hold, Jake felt his consciousness expanding, touching minds across the planet and beyond. The connection with Queen Zera became permanent and profound, but instead of losing his humanity, he found it enhanced by understanding an entirely different way of thinking. 6 months later, Jake stood in the first joint human Velthara research facility, watching as scientists from both species work side by side on projects that would benefit everyone. The first generation of genetically diverse Velthara children had been born, healthy and free of the fertility problems that had plagued their species. His sister Lisa visited from Earth, still not entirely comfortable with what her brother had become, but proud of what he had accomplished. Do you ever regret it? She asked, watching him communicate wordlessly with Queen Zera across the room. Jake considered the question seriously. He was no longer fully human, and he could never go back to his old life on the research station. But he was part of something bigger now, something that was shaping the future of two civilizations. I miss some things about being purely human, he admitted, but I've gained so much more. I'm helping to build a universe where different species can work together instead of exploiting each other. How could I regret that? As the sun set over the Velthara homeworld, painting the sky in colors that still amazed him, Jake felt a deep sense of peace. He had started this journey as one man trying to help save an alien species. He had ended it as a bridge between worlds, proof that cooperation and understanding could overcome even the deepest differences. The universe was vast and full of species that had yet to meet each other. But thanks to the choice he had made, future first contests would have a different model to follow. Instead of exploitation and fear, there could be partnership and hope. And that, Jake thought as he felt Queen Zera's contentment through their shared connection, was worth any sacrifice.